What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and welcome to another Warhammer 40k top some numbers of some things video. Today I thought we'd talk about something a little bit different and talk about the best Smash characters in Warhammer 40k. Now, I don't mean like Mario and Samus Aran and all those folks. I mean characters that are good at smashing face. Smash characters is a term that was coined, I think, by Space Marines way back in the day, when you would take a Space Marine captain, kit him out to beat face with warlord traits and relics, then use super efficient stratagems like Honor the Chapter to fight again, make double use out of those relics, hope your opponent would kill you, and then you could only in Death to Duty end to swing a third time and get immense damage out of these characters. A lot of times you could compound stratagems from Blood Angels or similar chapters and get multiple uses out of them by double or triple fighting. Most of those similar synergies have been removed from 40k, thank goodness. Gone are the days of 130 point Space Marine captain killing entire knights in one go, but we do have some very efficient melee characters in the game right now, and that's what we're going to cover. So what is the criteria to be a good Smash character? Obviously, you have to have a high damage output in melee. If the character can't smash face, clearly it's not a smashing character. Also, it's got to be able to get there, so good mobility is important as well. And last but not least, these are meant to be the guided missiles of Warhammer 40k. They are a fire and forget weapon, where they can be aimed directly at an important piece that your opponent has and let loose to wreak havoc before dying a noble death in combat. This means that they have to be efficient, so a low cost or low CP cost is important as well. Basically, these are the characters that you look down on the table and you go, maybe I don't move my unit to that objective. Maybe I don't overextend with my expensive vehicle, because that dude over there, he's gonna kill me. So let's get into it. The top 5 Smash characters in 40k, and some honorable mentions as well that we'll talk about too. Also, I'm not really going to talk about named characters or special characters in this video, although I might touch on a couple good examples when we get to the honorable mentions. So first up, we have a character that we don't see very often in the top tables of competitive 40k quite as much anymore, but still can put out the hurt in the fight phase. This is the Gene Stealer Cult Patriarch. Coming out of the Twisted Helix Cult, alongside the Elixir of the Prime Specimen to add some defensive stats as well as an additional attack, and the Biomorph adaptation. This guy comes in at a whopping 8 attacks at Strength 8 with full rerolls to wound, hitting on 2s. You can buff that even more with Psychic powers as well to send this guy's damage output through the stratosphere. And those 8 attacks are nothing to shake a stick at. Each one of them is D3 damage with full rerolls to wound, and wound rolls of 6 come in at AP, wait for it, -6 for a flat 3 damage. It's not the most impressive weapon stat line ever conceived, but when you have 8 of them and you reroll to wound, this guy could put a hurt on a Titan just fine. The downside of the Patriarch is that he also pays for some support abilities as well, including his Living Idol ability and his Psychic powers, which means that it isn't the most efficient unit, coming in at 135 points base, even more so if you add familiars, which then slow him down even more. He can advance and charge innately, and he gets all of the cult ambush abilities out of Gene Stealer cults, so he can set himself up for a charge pretty easily, but he's not shockingly fast either. Moving on, we're going to talk about some forces of the Imperium. This time, it's Becky out of Adeptus Sororitas. Becky, the pet nickname for an Order of the Bloody Rose Canoness, equipped with the Righteous Rage Warlord trait and the Beneficence Relic. Coming in again with 8 attacks, including those 3 bonus from Beneficence and the +1 for charging out of the Order of the Bloody Rose subfaction trait as well. This Canoness is relatively low strength at only strength 4, but at AP 3 and 2 flat damage with full rerolls to wound, and the potential of +1 to wound from the Bloody Rose stratagem, she can mix it up with the big boys. While she's not particularly fast, basically any Adeptus Sororitas unit has the ability to advance and charge with Holy Rage, and gets the benefit of Miracle Dice for potential extremely long charges if you really need it. She's also typically hanging out in a transport somewhere in the middle of the table to be aggressive with some Repentia, so getting to melee isn't really the problem with this particular character. Where things go crazy is the points cost of this model. Outside the Relic and Warlord trait, you're only spending 50 points for a Chainsword equipped Canoness, to beat the baseline for the character, which is phenomenally efficient. And while her damage output isn't quite as impressive as some of the other characters that we're going to talk about on this list, that ridiculously low points value alone is enough to get her to the 4th place. Moving on to number 3, we have the original namesake of the Smash character, the tried and true, the old faithful Space Marine Captain with a jump pack. There are a billion different ways to build this guy so that he becomes a ridiculously powerful Smash character. The ability to put 2 Warlord traits on a character means that you can stack multiple Warlord traits that buff your damage, meaning that unlike a lot of the other characters that we're talking about on this list, you're not just adding a relic and a warlord trait, you're also adding another ability and potentially a chapter tactic on top of that, meaning that Space Marine captains have an enormous swath of options to choose from when you're trying to buff their damage output. I'll mention 2 right here, the first one being a White Scars captain using the Teeth of Terra relic, Imperium Sword, and Chagorian Storm. This model's bringing 9 plus D3, 2 flat damage, strength 5, AP 2 or 3 attacks with the potential of +1 damage under the White Scars Super Doctrine. An insane amount of damage output from a relatively inexpensive platform. Another Smash character that you'll see pretty often, who isn't as impressive in its damage output, but for its support abilities as well, is the Armor of Rust captain coming out of Space Wolves, with Saga of the Hunter for additional threat range, or Saga of the Beast Slayer for +1 to wound and +1 attack against vehicles or monsters. If you want to, you can combo those 2 Warlord traits together, or add in some good old Imperium Sword for just +1 strength and damage. But alongside Armor of Rust, this character actually becomes difficult to kill and incredibly difficult to interact with, since he can embed himself in your army, make your stuff fight last before he kills it, then just continue to heroically intervene around the place, tie up your units, and slowly chew through your entire formation. Those aren't the only 2 ways you can build an incredibly powerful Smash captain. Salamanders focus builds on resilience or incredible strength, bringing a strength 8 Teeth of Terra chainsword if they need to. The same is also available in most Death Watch armies. Blood Angels, clearly with +1 to advance and charge and +1 to wound, in addition to the incredible swath of Warlord traits relics that they have available, also make great Smash characters. And you can even find some really interesting combos in Iron Hands with the ability to hit and run out of melee with Student of History. There's just so many options, and the Space Marine Captain, the good old Mini Marine Space Marine Foot Captain, is great. Shout out here as well to the bike captains, who trade a little bit of maneuverability for a little bit more resilience, and can be a baseline for a very resilient Smash character if you're looking to build that way. Bike characters typically build a little bit differently and often take a more supporting role versus going all-out offense like their foot brethren, but I do think it was worth mentioning anyway. Moving up to the penultimate pick in the list. If you've ever played against the wily Eldari, you've probably seen this guy on the table, and you've probably pulled your hair out by its roots trying to deal with him. It is the Harlequin Troopmaster, specifically using the Pivotal Roll stratagem to gain an additional Pivotal Roll ability, using Darkness Bite or Twilight's Grasp to deal 2 free additional mortal wounds, or just always wound on 2s, alongside Choreographer of War to give them full rerolls to wound against monsters or vehicles that Twilight's Grasp wouldn't hit. The scariest version of this particular guy is coming out of the Frozen Stars mask with Player of the Dark as well for additional mortal wounds on wound rolls of 6, which are going to compound with that Choreographer of War full rerolls on your wound rolls to just deal an immense amount of mortal wounds as well as an immense amount of Strength 5, 2 flat damage attacks. Shout out to the Soaring Spite version, which brings Sky Strider alternatively, who can pop out of a transport after it advances for an astronomical threat range, somewhere in the 30 to 40 inch range. This guy will get wherever he wants, use Curtain Falls to pop way back out of combat and chill back in his transport. So you have to get through multiple layers of defense to actually stop him from slowly attritioning your entire army to death. He is a nightmare, and even behind that, he's sitting on a 4+ invulnerable save, and sometimes just doesn't die. Sometimes he just sticks around for a while. This character also has the interesting ability with that Twilight Fang of getting more powerful the longer the game goes. So if you don't chase after him early to get rid of him before he soups up with that Twilight Fang, he can be swinging an incredible 11 attacks at that really solid profile and just dirting whatever he touches. Now let's talk about some honorable mentions of Smashy characters that didn't quite make the list, as well as some interesting picks for special characters that I think kind of fit into this category. First off, one after my own heart, the Smashy Hive Tyrant. This is a winged Tyranid Hive Tyrant bringing a bunch of monstrous scything talons, coming in at strength 6 AP 3 for flat 3 damage that can be upgraded with murderous size to make them strength 7 AP 4 for flat 4 damage, and or upgraded to the size of Tyron if you're playing Behemoth for an additional +1 strength, and access to +1 to wound from the special psychic power. Alternatively, you can also upgrade them with Xenogenic Acid to deal mortal wounds on wound rolls of 5+, and use the Voracious Appetite stratagem to full reroll your wound rolls with your melee attacks. The downside of this guy is he doesn't really fulfill any of the criteria of being a good Smash character. He's very expensive, coming in over 200 points depending on how you kit him out. Also fills a backup support role by paying a bunch of points for additional psychic powers, and he can get shot out from under your army, which means that he can be dealt with pretty easily before he makes contact. He also only has 5 attacks, and while flat 4 damage is really good, only 5 attacks isn't quite as impressive as some of the other entries we have on this list. That said, the threat range is almost unparalleled next to, anything else in the game, but certainly anything else on this list, given that using Hive Commander or other abilities in the Tyranid arsenal, you can move him, anywhere between like 20 and 45 inches before he charges. Then use Overrun once he blows up whatever he hits to run back out of combat and just be very difficult to deal with. It's a very fun piece to play with. Unfortunately, not particularly efficient, but definitely can get the job done if you need somebody to just go blow something up. Next up, for our generic options, let's talk about the Adeptus Custodes Shield Captain on Dawn Eagle Jetbike. Generally, with the Victor of the Blood Game stratagem, as well as the Captain Commander stratagem buffing him up, and the Auric Aquilus to make him even more difficult to kill and give him the sweet rerolls to charge. Downside of this guy is that, like the Hive Tyrant, not particularly efficient. Costing 3 CP before the game starts and a whole boatload of points. Unfortunately, the Jetbike Shield Captain isn't as much a fire and forget missile as we would like to have on this list. He also suffers from sort of hilariously lackluster damage output, coming in at only strength 6 and only 5 attacks with that Interceptor Spear, although a high AP and rerolls to wound are pretty solid. Once you get there, only D3 damage though means that he doesn't really smash very much. But those attacks are very efficient, and especially using Victor of the Blood games and combinations of Warlord traits or Captain Commander traits, you can make him ridiculously difficult to kill on the swing back. Pretty cool include, but I do think that these guys maybe need a little bit of a points break or some cool relics that they can take to buff their damage output to really be a good entry for this list. Next up, let's talk about some interesting special characters that can kind of fill this role. The first up, I think, one of the classiest ones, Drazhar, coming out of Drukhari, the character Incubus. This guy has a wild melee profile, coming in at only 4 attacks, but when swinging his Demiclaves with the dual-bladed profile, attacking 6 times, and if he charged, he can fight twice, meaning he can get selected multiple times during the charging fight step of the fight phase. This does give your opponent the opportunity to interrupt and attack him before he's able to make his second set of swings, but if they don't end up taking him out, he can swing a potential 12 times, which is pretty cool. The profile is not super exciting, only strength 4, minus 2 AP for flat 2 damage, going up to strength 5, or 3 AP at the cost of those 2 dual blade attacks. However, he has a passive aura of +1 to wound, so strength 4 with +1, pretty solid, and on wound rolls of 6, he adds an additional 2 damage to his weapon, making it damage 4. He can also be rerolling all of his failed wound rolls if you give him his Warlord trait of Eternal Hatred. So a grand total of 12 attacks at strength 4 with +1 to wound between damage 2 and 4 is pretty solid. Downside, Drazhar doesn't really do anything to deliver himself, although he can webway gate onto the table and just try to charge out a deep strike, or just pile on with a dude in a Venom and hopefully he gets there by himself. I'm sure someone in the comments will absolutely have a hissy fit if I don't mention Karn the Betrayer in a list of smashy characters. Kind of a similar profile to Drazhar, swinging 7 attacks on the charge. At strength 6, a massive AP of 4 for D3 damage, and always hits on a 2+ regardless of modifiers, which is pretty cool, alongside the ability to fight twice each fight phase, regardless of whether or not Karn actually declared a charge that turn. It is better when he declares a charge because he can fight twice regardless of whether or not he kills everyone in melee with him. But even if he's using that fight twice more defensively, he is going to be able to cleave through a ton of enemy models. Between 12 and 14 attacks at a pretty decent profile is pretty solid. That said, he does have the ability to accidentally kill your own guys if he moves within an inch of them, so some careful positioning is probably needed to use Karn to the best of his ability, and on top of that, he's only one infantry idiot who just wanders around the table with a movement value of 6, so he's going to need to be in a Rhino or a similar transport for the most part if you actually want to get him to the melee with any alacrity. Interestingly, he also has a reroll aura for World Eaters, but he doesn't affect it himself outside of his shooting attack because he can't reroll his own hit rolls. Amazing. The drawbacks of Karn the Betrayer are much easier to swallow when you consider his points cost of only 115 points, which is pretty decent for a character that's going to be swinging that many times. In 8th edition, I would have been remiss to ignore such a powerful Smash character as Ragnar Blackmane, one of the most efficient combat characters that Warhammer 40k has ever seen. However, without the same support for Smash characters that we had in the Saga of the Beast for characters like Ragnar, he isn't quite as ridiculous as he was, although his profile is still nothing to shake a stick at. Coming in at only 130 points, Ragnar swings 10 attacks on the charge. You heard me right. We're not double fighting here. He just attacks 10 times. And brings some additional support in a Rites of Battle aura as well. How far the mighty have fallen from the heady heights of 8th edition Smash Space Wolf characters, but I do think attacking a lot of times for a relatively reasonable cost with a decent profile, still worth talking about. Last, and probably least for special characters, although I'm sure that there's probably a half dozen that I'm ignoring in this particular list, I'll talk about another one that's close to my heart, Old One-Eye. A lot like the Smashy Hive Tyrant, Old One-Eye has a similar problem in that he is not efficient whatsoever. As a Smashy Fire and Forget missile, Old One-Eye is no good. Coming in at 220 points. A staggering 220 points. Old One-Eye unfortunately has not made the transition between 8th to 9th edition particularly gracefully. Previously, you could wombo combo together sub-faction traits and special abilities to allow him to explode his attacks on 3s, thanks to his Berserk Rampage rule, meaning that this dude made a ridiculous number of attacks. Unfortunately, that time is over, and he now only explodes his attacks on 5s. Thanks to the new rule capping the bonuses to hit, you can get to only 1. Still, Old One-Eye makes a baseline 6 attacks, hitting on 2s, rerolling his 1s to hit, and exploding those attacks on 5s, with the potential to full reroll his wounds at a pretty decent strength of 7 for a flat 3 damage, fighting twice, and fighting when he dies, meaning that you could potentially be doing that 3 times in a single fight phase, which is pretty gross. Also, fortunately for Old One-Eye, being in Tyranids means that the question of delivery isn't really a question at all. He's probably just going to get there. Not only does his Alpha Leader ability make him untargetable by ranged attacks while other Carnifexes are near him, regardless of whether or not he's the closest Carnifex to them, meaning he can actually lead the charge of your Carnifexes, but Tyranids also just can deliver melee stuff super easily. We got Hive Commander, we got Hive Fleet Kraken abilities, you can make him move a billion inches before he charges and get into whatever you need him to. A little too expensive to really be considered as a true Smash character, but he is a pretty interesting unit. And with that, let's talk about another interesting unit. The best Smash character in all of Warhammer 40k. Who could it be? In the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, there is one adage that holds true, regardless of faction or the battlefield you fight on, and that is, Orcs is the best. And in this list, that certainly is the case, with the best Smash character in 40k being the Orc Warboss on Warbike. Specifically, the version piled with upgrades past his ears, using the biggest boss stratagem to give him an invulnerable save, an additional wound, bringing him to a ridiculous sum of 8, as well as an attack, so swinging 6 times, and the brutal but cunning Warlord trait, giving him full rerolls to hit and an additional damage on his melee weapons. Combo that with Dakilla Claw Relic to give him a flat 3 damage, increased to 4 with the Warlord trait, and full rerolls to wound. This guy is attacking 6 times, hitting on 2s, rerolling, wounding on probably 2s at strength 12, with full rerolls at a flat 4 damage. Ridiculous. He affects himself with his own Speed Wall aura, meaning that he's also moving 14 inches, plus an advance before charging, can even buff other nearby biker and vehicle units with the same ability, giving him a ridiculous threat range, and all for the low cost of 115 points. Pretty solid stuff, especially when you consider that you could potentially build him alternatively to make him insanely difficult to kill. With those 8 wounds at toughness 7, with a damage ignore roll on top of his invulnerable save, he can just get stuck in and keep fighting. On top of that, being an orc character, he can also fight when he dies, meaning that even sticking this guy directly up the maw of a drastically superior fighter, he will probably be able to take it down with that massive claw. So while not the most attacks or the most impressive tricks of all of the units on this list, for only 115 points, a ridiculous threat range, flat 4 damage, and a bunch of rerolls to hit and wound, the Orc Warboss character is the pinnacle of what it means to be a Smash character. The only downside is you can't actually take more than one. And also, you can't take him if you have Gazgul Thraka in your army, because he is the biggest boss, not this guy. So anyway, that's the entirety of the list. I hope you all enjoyed this. Let me know down in the comments if you enjoyed this kind of video, and any Smash character combos that you like to use in your games, or ones that you think I missed. Maybe we can revisit this list later on and do a little updates. Anyway, thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. I really appreciate it. I also appreciate my patrons over at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise. They're the best, as well as the YouTube channel members you can join in the link down below the video. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.